Dylan Robinson must not redshirt for Washington in 2025.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a quick reminder, wherever you're getting this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new video. Any questions, comments, concerns, drop right down below in the comment section. And if you're an audio-only listener, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as all that really does help us out a lot. Make sure to follow us on social media as well, wherever you're on it, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're at Locked On Huskies. We're dropping all kinds of fun off-season content until fall camp at the end of July. We'll have a lot of fun stuff coming there as well. But until then, we got a really fun show coming at all of you everydayers out there today. I'm going to be talking about Khary Wilder, the 4-star defensive lineman, who is the top target for Washington on the defensive line right now. He's set all his official visits, so we'll see where Washington stands in that competition. But the main point of the show today is we're going to be talking about a lot of freshmen who should not and probably will not redshirt for Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff in 2025. We'll get to the offensive guys in a little bit. We're going to start on the defensive side of the ball because I believe that one player who will not redshirt for Washington is Dylan Robinson, 4-star cornerback from Bonita High School in California. I look at him and I see a big physical cornerback listed at 6'3", 190 pounds, who's set to come in this June. I remember walking around during a couple of Washington spring practices. He took an unofficial visit early on during spring, I believe over his spring break, to take in a few practices. And I remember watching him stand next to Tacario Davis and Ephesians Prysock, and just physically, he's somebody who already looks the part, which is always just crazy to see for, somebody who not even is an early enrollee, somebody who's coming in with the leap, the rest of the leap freshmen in the middle of June, and we'll see what that looks like for him. But just somebody of that stature and that size, already you're checking the first major box, which is can you physically handle the workload of a college player? And I think it's an easy yes for him. And the biggest challenge is going to be, can he find a way to learn this defense quickly? And I think for what he's going to be asked to do, from what we saw a lot of these outside corners do this spring, what Tacario Davis did early on before he got hurt, what we've seen just in limited reps from Ephesians Prysock, from Leroy Bryant, from everybody else who's played that position, I think it's going to be a very easy yes for him because, again, with somebody of that size, he's going to be asked to play a lot of press man coverage and just a lot of man in general, which is going to make this transition to the college level very, very easy for him. And I think the other big thing here, when I look at why he shouldn't redshirt, is just what this position group looks like. There are a lot of true freshmen, just a lot of young players in the position. When I look at the early enrollees at the position in Darian Clemens and Ramon Adams, I look at both those guys and I say, I like their potential, but I don't think they're nearly as physically ready to play, which is okay, as Dylan Robinson is. And it's something where what this position group is going to look like moving forward, in my mind, I don't see Washington taking a transfer cornerback in December unless things get somewhat dire at the position. We know that Jedd Fisch loves to just use the transfer portal to supplement more than anything else, unless, you're going out and getting a high-end player like Tacario Davis, who also just happens to have, worlds of familiarity with his coaching staff. Crazy how that works out. But with Dylan Robinson, I think that this coaching staff is planning on having him step into a much, much bigger role in 2026, a lot like what we saw with Damon Williams, where obviously it's a very different position at quarterback, but I look at just what he's going to be asked to do in this defense, plus what that position group looks like, and I think it's going to be very, very important to find ways to get him in every single game. Now, early on, that might just be, fourth quarter of a blowout against, some of these early season opponents, whether it be UC Davis, Colorado State. But as the season goes on, if Ephesians Prysock needs a breather for a couple of plays, or you want to rotate out to Tacario Davis and just see what else you're working with in, just the fourth quarter of a conference game against, again, let's call it Purdue or something like that, Dylan Robinson is probably going to be that first option because we know what Leroy Bryant is going to give you, and I think he's going to rank higher on the depth chart than Dylan Robinson when it's all said and done, but we're going to see a lot of both of those guys on the field this season. And so I'm really curious to see what this cornerback group of the future is going to look like with both Ephesians Prysock and Tacario Davis being seniors this upcoming season. And I feel like I can take a lot of what I just said and apply it to someone who did enroll early, and that's Rylon Dillard-Allen. I look at Rylon Dillard-Allen and I see such a phenomenal athlete and just a really, really impressive player who picked up this defense very fast over the course of spring practice. And this is one of those guys where we look at what Peyton Waters did last season before he ended up transferring to North Carolina. This coaching staff liked him so much they were comfortable burning his red shirt while mainly utilizing him on special teams. I don't know if that would necessarily be the case with Rylon, where I look at safety and I think it's a lot deeper than what you have at corner per se. But I see Rylon as someone who has the ability to make an early impact because of his athleticism, because of his range over the top. And as he's continued to add size, he really does look like somebody who he's not going to start this season. Same thing as Dylan Robinson. He's not usurping McKellar's team. He's not overcoming CJ Christian or even Alex McLaughlin to an extent. But that number 4 safety slot where we saw Vincent Holmes get a lot of time, we saw Raheem Wright doing some work there, Paul Menke as well. I think that Rylon's ceiling is just as high, if not higher, than any of those other guys. So if he ends up winning that battle to be safety 4 this fall, that's not going to be something that surprises me. And with the way this coaching staff and Ryan Walters and John Richardson love to rotate in and out some of these defensive backs, he's another guy who you are going to find a way to get him opportunities throughout the season, because in 2026, let's be real, the same thing with Dylan Robinson. I think he's going to just all of a sudden jump and become one of those starters, because I look at what he brings to the table and what Alex McLaughlin does, and I think that's your safety pairing for next season. I think they're going to find ways to make sure both of those guys are contributors in some way, shape, or form this fall. So then all of a sudden next year, both of them can take a big jump forward, where it'll be Alex McLaughlin's final season, but with RDA as a just true sophomore, he's going to be somebody who you can build this defense around for multiple seasons. And it showed with just how this coaching staff felt about him throughout the recruiting process, the way they prioritized him. Even when he was committed to Arizona State, they made sure that they found a way to stay in the race. And then, of course, he decommits from there, and Washington finds a way to win that battle. I think it's very, very important to this coaching staff that he finds a way onto the field. And that's how I feel about this last guy in Zaydrius Rainey-Sale, where if I were to pick one player in, when this class whole signed in December, I would have picked Zaydrius Rainey-Sale as the one player who would not redshirt from this group, because you look at the size. He's physically ready to play. 6'2", 225. You look at the burst and the tackling ability that he has on film, and I just see somebody who is an elite future all-conference type of potential. Like, that's what kind of player he is. Unfortunately, he tore his ACL in a high school game, I believe in late October, so I'm curious to see what that's going to look like as we get into fall camp. And he's somebody who, again, I have all the expectations in the world for moving forward, because he has earned that from the ability that he's shown on film, plus what kind of personality he seems to be, and how quickly, according to linebackers coach Brian Odom, he picked up the defense since he enrolled in January. So if he's able to get on the field in August, maybe you find a way to utilize this guy on special teams and have him play just kind of that same role that we saw Xree Alexander and Devin Bryant play a little bit of this spring, where sometimes he's lined up as a true inside linebacker, but sometimes he drops down into that wide 9 technique and plays outside linebacker, because he's got that level of physicality and frame as well to be able to find a way to set the edge against the run or rush the passer. So there's so much there that I think if we see him on the field early, even just coming off a knee injury so soon, that it shouldn't be a surprise. I'm a little bit more wary than I was, before we learned about his ACL tear. But it's one of those things where the more I watch his film and the more I just go back and read some of my notes from the spring and just listen to what some of the coaching staff had to say about him, I couldn't be more confident in what his future holds, because of his mentality, because of his just potential on film. Everything just seems to line up to, this is somebody who Jed Fish and his coaching staff want to build their defense around. So that's something that I think they're going to try to find a way to do and get him integrated into the defense as soon as physically possible. And I feel like we can say the same thing about a few guys on the offensive side as well. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Now, speaking of performance trends, I think the Huskies are going to be trending up in a big way this season. Their over-under right now for wins this season is set at 7. 7.5 on FanDuel, and I absolutely love the over. The way the schedule is shaping up, not just some of the young guys that I've talked about and that I think are going to find a way to be contributors this fall, but some of these returning veterans, whether it be the cornerback pairing of Takario Davis and Ephesians Prysock, Jonah Coleman, Denzel Boston, and of course, Damon Williams. I think this team is going to hit the over this season. I'm really excited about what their future holds. New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's jump over to the offensive side. I feel like we always start on the offensive side, so it's nice to kind of flip-flop a little bit here because there are 4 guys I want to get to. 2 at receiver and 2 on the offensive line. Let's start at wide receiver because I look at this group and I really do believe that at the very least, one of Chris Lawson and Raiden Vines-Bright is not going to redshirt. Now, as the everydayers know, Lars and I have taken a lot of time to talk about Chris Lawson in particular because throughout spring practice, he was one of the most impressive receivers in general. And again, that was without a group that was without Denzel Boston for all of spring practice, without Amari Evans for most of it, and without Rasheed Williams the last week and a half or so. So there were a lot of opportunities for these young receivers to step up, and Chris Lawson made the most of that opportunity. I was so impressed with his ability as a route runner, with his understanding of leverage, his understanding of just finding ways to create chemistry with any quarterback that he was working with, whether it was one of his fellow freshmen in Dash Biley or Cheston Keeney McMillan, whether it was backup Kai Horton or Damon Williams. No matter who he was working with, he found a way to make things happen. I was particularly impressed with him in Washington's second spring scrimmage, where he found a way to score several touchdowns in the red zone period, was really good at making midair adjustments, and his body control was just spectacular and finding ways to make plays along the sideline, in the end zone. So he's somebody that I look at, and I really do think that if Washington isn't even necessarily in a pinch, if we get into fall camp and he finds a way to beat out, whether it be Kevin Green Jr. or Audric Harris, some of the guys that are currently ahead of him right now in that slot role, I wouldn't be surprised. And I'm not saying that to knock anybody else's talent in the room. I'm saying that because I think that Chris Lawson provides a lot that Washington is going to need this fall. Now, I say that because I look at Kevin Green and I think he's going to be integral to the success of this offense as well because of what he brings as a blocker and what he showed he can be as a safety blanket for Damon Williams at times during camp last season. So that's something I'm really interested in as well. But I think that Chris Lawson's upside is something that is really tantalizing to this coaching staff. And I feel like you can say the same thing about Raiden Vines-Bright, who won't necessarily just be limited to the slot. I think that Chris Lawson will do the majority of his damage there just in terms of his college career. And I think you could say that when you look at Raiden Vines-Bright in terms of his size and his build. But when you look at just the overarching skill set that he possesses, especially with his speed, he's someone who I do believe is going to make a big impact on the outside because he has the ability to stretch the field. And he has just so many skills in terms of tackle breaking. We saw all this during the spring game when he had, whatever it was, 8 catches for somewhere in the range of 145 yards and a touchdown. He's got the ability to toe tap on the sidelines. And he was just in a rhythm with his quarterbacks at all 3 levels of the field, whether it be just drag routes, intermediate, downfield stuff. And it's so nice to see that because that's something that is so vital to this offense, where Lars and I on this show, we talk a lot about the Jacob Cowing role because that's something that these receivers tell us a lot. Audric Harris talked about that with us ad nauseum over the course of the spring when we got a chance to talk to him. It was, yeah, this is the film that these coaches want me to watch. It's Jacob Cowing from his time in Arizona and Giles Jackson last season. And that's something where when you look at Giles Jackson's best game of his career in the 2024 Sun Bowl, where he had 11 catches for 160 yards and 4 touchdowns, it was a lot of that where it was moving him around the formation, getting him inside, getting him outside. And that's something that Jacob Cowing did really well at Arizona. And that's something that I think Raiden Vines-Bright can do as well because he has that top-end gear that is just so hard to find. And that's something that I look at and I think to myself, there is no reason that that kid should not play a lot this fall. And it was a kind of a bummer that his spring was cut short due to a hamstring injury that Jed Fish talked about, because I think that I probably would have led with him and talked about him a little more if we had seen a little bit more from him. So if he's able to stay healthy this fall, if he even jumps over Chris Lawson, that's not something that's going to surprise me, which is just really good to see because this is a group where I'm sure if you look at some of these national media projections, there are a lot of people who are going to ask questions of who is Damon Williams going to throw to? Now I look at this top group of receivers, and we know Denzel Boston is going to be that 1A sort of target. And then Omari Evans, Rashid Williams, and Decker DeGraff are all going to be mixed into that just group right behind him, where all of them have the potential to emerge as the number 2 target behind Denzel. And I think that this other group of Audric Harris, Kevin Green, Chris Lawson, and Raiden Vines-Bright, 2 players are going to emerge from that group as well. And there is absolutely no reason from not only Jedd Fisch's tendencies to play these young players, but from what they've shown us in spring practice, there is no reason to count out these true freshmen from that group. So that's something I'm really excited to see. And I'm also really excited to see where John Mills and Champ Taulealea are going to fit along the offensive line. Let's start with John Mills, because I think this is somebody who has honestly put himself as with a very, very outside chance to end up as the starter at right guard, just because we saw him really impress. And as spring practice wore on, we saw him take more and more reps with the first team. Now, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think those positions are going to end up going to Paki Finau at left, and probably Gear Hatchett on the right side, with Zach Henning working in a little bit there as well. But I look at what John Mills brings to the table, and I think we're going to see him certainly play in more than 4 games this season, partially because when we look at what this 2026 offensive line could look like, there is absolutely room for him to establish himself as a starter, whether it be at left tackle or on the interior of the line with Carver Willis set to graduate after the season. And I think this coaching staff wants to see what he has right away, because if you're able to throw him out there at left tackle and maybe he still rotates in with somebody else, that's fine, but you need to find a way to get him on the field right now to make sure that you can do that, to make sure that he has some of that necessary experience under his belt, because that's so important in the Big Ten. And especially for a guy like that, where when I talked about the guys on the defensive side of the ball, physically being ready and looking the part is so important, especially on the offensive line. And I know that there's a large contingent of people who look at any true freshman playing along the offensive line and say, no, you're going to do it next year. Well, the tough news is that's what Jedd Fisch wants to do. So that's what's going to happen, whether people like it or not. And I think that John Mills, with what he brings to the table physically at 6'6", 335, 340 pounds, whatever it is he's listed at right now, I think that he gives you as good of a shot as any on an offensive line where there are still a lot of questions. Now, I firmly believe that this group is going to be way better than it was last season, where, it's hard to get worse than a group that allowed a conference high 39 sacks. But I really do believe that this is going to be a much improved unit. And John Mills is somebody who, wherever you plug him in, if it's at guard, if it's at tackle, is going to provide that, whether it be late in blowout games, like a lot of these freshmen are going to see time in early on in the season against, again, the UC Davises, the Colorado States of the world, which is great. But I think that it's going to go beyond that for John Mills because of his physicality and just because of the level of play he brings to the field right now. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like. And all of that can be said for Champ Taulealea. I just think he's a little bit more pigeonholed into his position, where we saw him get some reps at center early in the spring, and I don't think that's necessarily going to be the best fit for him moving forward. But I look at what he can be at guard, and I think he's got the power and the physicality that you need to succeed there no matter what. And playing guard is something that's certainly not easy in the Big Ten, but it's something where a good scheme can help a guard out a lot, especially early on in his career, where, to take it back to Arizona, where you can just pull so much of what Jedd Fisch wants to do in terms of tendencies, in terms of development plans. You can pull so much from that. Jonas Savaiinaea is a really, really good one to look at. And I think he fits John Mills just a slight bit better here. Wendell Maue is a better example to talk about, but I want to go with Savaiinaea because that is just kind of the top end of what a Jedd Fisch development plan can look like along the offensive line, where you look at him and you see a big physical guy who got a lot of opportunities really early on at guard, and then you kick him out to tackle. And again, that's why you look at Champ, and he's probably not going to kick out to tackle at any point in his career, but you just look at how you were able to utilize his strengths effectively when you talk about his physical strength and his power and his ability to be a downhill run blocker right now. And I think Jedd Fisch's scheme can help him out a lot, where if we see him play in 5, 6, 7 games as, maybe even a 6th offensive lineman, you just find ways to get him on the field in short yardage situations and just have him utilize what he does best against some of these Big Ten teams and really get a feel for the physicality of the conference, that's going to help you out in the long run as well, where, all of a sudden with Kieran Hatchett out the door after the season, you can find a way to have him compete for that right guard job as well. And all of a sudden, this offensive line is deeper and stronger and way more experienced than it was at any point last season. And as you continue to try to develop Damon Williams, that's going to be so, so crucial. Now, that's all I got on these freshmen. It's time to jump over to the recruiting trail because Washington needs to win this battle for 4-star defensive lineman Khary Wilder. There are a few players who have come up more often on this show than 4-star defensive lineman Khary Wilder from Junipero High School in Southern California. Now, Khary Wilder has officially set his 4 official visits. He was originally going to visit Arizona, USC, UCLA, and Washington. Now, he's flipped Arizona and USC into Ohio State and Notre Dame, along with UCLA, and Washington is still getting the final visit, which is good news here. I'll get to that in a second. This is the kind of battle that Jedd Fisch needs to win. We've seen him go out and make the big flip away from Oregon in 5-star offensive tackle Cody Green. We've seen him take in-state players away from Ohio State and Oregon in 4-star edge rusher Derek Coleman-Brusa. This is a completely different kind of challenge, and it's something where Lars and I talked about Sam Utu on yesterday's show, as David Harris know, and this is similar, if not more important, in my opinion. Because, as I've said numerous times, defensive line is what will define this class. It will make it or it will break it. And right now, Khary Wilder is the most important player in that regard due to several things: his versatility, his power. I want to make sure I get a nice in-depth just discussion on him going at some point in this episode, but I want to talk about why it's so important to win that battle first and what it could show about Jedd Fisch, Jason Kaufusi, and the rest of this coaching staff, because Khary Wilder is the kind of player that you need to have in this recruiting class, again, because of everything he brings on field and because of his traits, but because of what it says about Washington. I have beaten the drum repeatedly discussing what kind of program Washington is when it's at its best. It is a top 10, top 15 program in the nation, and we've seen them compete at that level consistently in the last 10 seasons. Under Chris Peterson, when you got to a national championship 2 seasons ago, Washington can be at that level, yet it is consistently cast aside, and, we're at a point where I look around at some of these just comments that you'll see when a player like Landon Barnes or, whoever else is having Washington in their top schools. There are a lot of people who say, oh, you're considering Washington. Like, Washington doesn't have that elite level in that. And winning the battle for someone like Khary Wilder can continue to prove what UW is at its best. And you look at Ohio State and Notre Dame, they were the 2 finalists for the national championship this past season. So being able to go toe-to-toe with them and win that battle for someone you've been pushing for a very, very long time is absolutely critical. And he's somebody that I look at and I say, I think Washington is in a really, really good position with him, where he'll visit Ohio State first, then UCLA is June 6th. Ohio State's coming up this weekend, by the way. UCLA on June 6th, Notre Dame on June 13th, 14th, I believe it is, and then Washington that final June 20th, June 21st weekend, which is a really good sign to get that final visit, be able to just kind of wash out everything else that, he might have seen at some of these other programs, which is a big part of recruiting, is just making sure you leave a lasting impact on a player. But it's one of those things where you look at some of these other offers where it's not like, he's got a list of 25, 30 offers and it's, this mid-major program, that mid-major program that makes sure they extend offers to everybody. Yeah, those programs are in there, but he's also got an Alabama offer, a Georgia offer. Most of the schools in the SEC have extended offers to him because he is that level of talented that these schools believe that he could play whatever position he wants to on the defensive line, which is such a big part of this, whether he ends up as an edge rusher, whether he ends up as a true defensive tackle, or whether he's a tweener that can do a little bit of both, because he has that kind of frame at 6'4" and 250 pounds. And you combine that with his versatility, with the motor that he brings to the table. And you really are looking at someone who, even though he has seen a big rise over the course of this offseason and is ranked inside the top 250, which, is nice to see from a standpoint of a talent evaluation, but is somebody who really does deserve to be ranked even higher than that, because he is that caliber of player. And it's something where Washington needs to find a way to win this battle for all of those reasons, plus what he could bring to this defensive line in 2026. That's the other reason I wanted to make sure I brought this up, is because you talk about players who aren't going to redshirt this season, the Dylan Robinsons, the Chris Lawsons, the Raiden Vines-Brights, whoever else it is you want to say. Khary Wilder could very easily be in that discussion next year because of his talent level, because of the turnover Washington is going to experience along the defensive line over the next year, over the next 2 years. He is the kind of building block that you can look at and say he is just critical to success along the defensive front. And I really don't mean to overstate this, but he really is that important to this coaching staff right now. And you can just watch that film and you see somebody who can just be a dominant player in the Big Ten, which is why Ohio State has made such a big late push for him. Will it end up paying off? Who knows? I look at the situation with Larry Johnson, where I think that certainly has turned off a couple of defensive line recruits saying, is he going to be around for the next 3, 4, 5 years if I commit to him? I think that could be in play here, and I'm curious to see what Washington might have to say about that when he gets on campus. But that's something where I look at how both those schools in Ohio State and Notre Dame have developed defensive linemen, and that's another big reason for Washington needing to make sure that you secure him, is these schools have very long histories of doing that, but Washington does it as well. And if you can make sure that he is a big part of your scheme and just you sell him on being such a crucial player who can play right away, and you don't need to worry about redshirting because of, the 4 or 5 guys that you're going to end up losing to graduation after the season, those are things that can make a lasting impact on top of a development plan, on top of selling, hey, look at all these defensive linemen we've gotten drafted in the first round and the second round over the last 5-10 years. It's cool to see the Polynesian culture video that the Say Who Project put out earlier today as I'm recording this on Tuesday, because that's part of it as well, selling some of these players like a JoJo Mathis, a Danny Shelton, Vita Vea, all these other high-end defensive linemen that Washington has been able to produce over the last 5-10 seasons. Those are guys that can certainly make an impact. I can't leave out Haole Kikaha, one of my favorite players to watch growing up, in that same regard as well. But these are all things that you can take to a meeting with Khary Wilder and say, hey, this is Washington's tradition with defensive linemen. That's not ours because we're in year 2 as a coaching staff, but that's what this program has been able to do, and we are dedicated to continuing that moving forward. And the reason I bring that up, and why it might sound silly to some, but that's something that this coaching staff has taken very, very seriously. And it's something where if you listen to any interview with John Richardson, we posted a lot of those, by the way, in our insider group. You can check that out down in the description below. That's something where he always makes sure to bring up, this is DBU. And I am very, very committed to making sure that I carry on that legacy and I move it forward with, the guys that are in my room right now, whether it be Takario Davis, Ephesians Prysock, whoever else you want to say. And that's something that I really like about this coaching staff and what they're able to do, is they have wasted no time ingraining themselves in Washington's tradition and what has made this university so strong on the football field over the last handful of years, and what has made it a traditional power when you go back to what the Don James era was and everything like that. Of course, there were some dark years in the early to mid 2000s, but Washington has found a way to, and this coaching staff especially, has found a way to pick up where Kalen DeBoer, where Chris Peterson left off, and continue to develop players at a very, very high level. So I'm really excited to see what that's going to look like going forward. And Khary Wilder is the perfect player to sell all that, because as you continue to try to collect big, versatile defensive linemen, what is going to be a big class of them with, the Fasiales and the David Schwarzels of the world as well as the T.I.U. Mukais, Dakota Dixon, all these other defensive linemen that are going to be visiting over the next couple of weeks. They are all crucial to Washington's success moving forward, because we saw what not having a deep, talented defensive line looks like in the Big Ten in 2024. And it's something that we've seen this coaching staff make sure to address through the transfer portal by bringing in as many players as they did. And that certainly doesn't look like it's going to be the case in 2025, but that doesn't feel like a sustainable method of success, continuing to churn out 3, 4, 5 guys from the transfer portal every year. And Jed Fish has said as much plenty of times, which is why they want to go this high school route. And selling a player like Khary Wilder is going to be so crucial in that regard. I feel like that's a point that just can't be overstated enough, because that's just what this coaching staff wants to do moving forward. They have so many plans to make sure that this is a strong front seven for Ryan Walters, who is going to employ a lot more of those 5-down looks, because we saw it throughout spring practice, and getting players who are going to thrive in that scheme and consistently win one-on-one matchups to get into the backfield and just tear down these run-heavy offenses, or can get after a couple of these pass-first offenses in the Big Ten, the USCs, the Oregons, the Ohio States of the world at times, depending on what that personnel looks like. Having a deep, talented defensive line to deal with that is critical for that. It's critical for success if you want to get to the college football playoff, and if you want to advance. You look at all those defensive lines and what they look like year in and year out. They are churning out NFL talent. And that's something Washington absolutely has the ability to do, but we need to see it on a more consistent basis, and bringing in top-tier defensive linemen that give you just a really nice floor to work with is so important. And Khary Wilder, now that Derek Coleman-Bruce is in the boat, is the most important player in that regard for this recruiting class. Now, that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much to all you everydayers out there for tuning in. It really does mean a lot as we get into the offseason, and I know people are just looking for different things to talk about. You're always going to find that right here on Locked On Huskies, so please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day, so make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section, and if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.